Welcome back to ACTV. Today we're going to be talking about coloring buttercream and the difference between coloring American buttercream versus Swiss meringue buttercream, and 7 tips for coloring Swiss meringue buttercream because it is so different than American buttercream. So to start, let's just look at the American buttercream. This is just your traditional American recipe. It's part shortening, part butter, powdered sugar, and it has much more of a true white color than a Swiss meringue buttercream. And that's really the problem when going to color Swiss meringue buttercream, is that it has such a yellow tint to it. It's hard to get the colors that you're going for, but there's a lot of tips and tricks for that. A couple of other things to be on the lookout for before you start. So this is Swiss meringue buttercream that has been sitting for quite some time, probably about 48 hours. It's pretty yellow, and the consistency, it's pretty thick. It's kind of pulling apart a little bit. This Swiss meringue buttercream is a little bit more white than this one because it was just whipped. So the longer you let it whip, the more white it gets. And that'll be one of our tips that we'll go in depth about later. So with the American buttercream already having this white shade, let's say we were going to use a neon bright pink color. It's gonna take a little bit better than our Swiss. Let's use this one, fresh batch of Swiss meringue buttercream, and add the same color. So just as I'm mixing, you can see it's got a pretty bright pink color already, and this is the American. Okay, when I go color the Swiss, it doesn't give you that same shade right off the bat. We're really gonna have to work to get the same tone. And it's just because the butter content in Swiss meringue buttercream is so high that you get the butter color pretty strong. Okay. So this one is American, and that one's Swiss. Not the exact amount. I didn't measure how much of the gel color I put in there, but it's pretty close, and you can see there's a huge difference, and this one really does have a yellow undertone to it. So let's go over all the tips for trying to get really nice colors with Swiss meringue buttercream. Starting with working with small batches. So that's really important because it might take some time to figure out your colors and mixing colors, blending them to get the right shades. So it helps if you work with a small batch. You know, taking out 4 pounds of buttercream and trying to color it is not the best idea. It's only going to frustrate you. So start with something really small, just like this, and see what you need to do to get the right shade, and then go back and try to make a bigger batch out of it. Definitely, I would suggest taking notes too when you're working with these small batches, and write down what you do to get the colors that you're going for. That way you remember when you go back to your bigger batch or when you have to make it again the next time. The second tip is to prep your colors ahead of time. And this is great for so many reasons. Number one, it cuts down on stress. You know, you don't want to be working on a cake that's due in 4 hours. Well, you never want to do that. And be down to the wire trying to color your buttercream and it just be a nightmare. And the second reason is because a lot of colors do require some sitting time. I think this is true for American and Swiss meringue buttercream, but Swiss in particular. For example, if you were trying to get a black color, definitely you would want to make it the day before, or at least, I'm saying a day before, but for sure 12 hours before. That way it has time to really pull the color. And another tip for black, I would start off with black cocoa powder and then try to achieve the black color with a little bit of black candy color and black gel color. So the third tip is to be patient, because trying to color buttercream and get very exact hues and shades to match someone's color palette that they've requested really takes practice. You know, getting a dusty blue or a burnt orange, it's not as easy as you think, especially if you're working with Swiss meringue. So just be patient and practice. So this brings me into my next tip, which is get to know your colors and your buttercream. You know, like we mentioned earlier, working with freshly whipped Swiss meringue is much different than working with Swiss meringue buttercream that's been sitting for a day or two. So really get to know your buttercream and your colors. So let me just give you a little example here. We're working with this pink color, and actually that's American. This is Swiss. it's not giving the same bright color as you would think with the American buttercream or what you see here on the bottle. It's just not the same when working with Swiss. So you might have to do a couple of other things, which we'll get into next, to get the right tone, but really priority is getting to know your colors. There are different brands of colors too, you know, most popular Chef Master and AmeriColor. Choose what you like. My next and fifth tip for getting white buttercream, because it's super important, especially if you are working on a lot of wedding cakes, you might need a lot of white buttercream. And as you can see, this just isn't really true white. And you may never get pure stark white with Swiss meringue buttercream, but you can get really close. So the first tip is to start with a little bit of violet, which most people out there would recommend this. I also say going along with adding violet is to let your buttercream whip for a decent amount of time until it gets almost like yogurt consistency, pretty thin, but can still stay on the spatula, just because the longer you whip it, the whiter it gets, but obviously it has to be workable and you have to be able to put it on a cake, you know, and ice it or pipe it onto a cupcake. So we've got a little bit of freshly whipped Swiss meringue buttercream here. Whenever I add violet to try to balance out the yellow color before adding white, I always use a toothpick. Don't ever just squirt it in here because you'll end up going purple. And we're really just trying to balance out the yellow. So I am just taking a little bit on my toothpick. I mean, a little bit. Put it in here. Mix it up a little bit. And already it's kind of getting rid of some of my yellow tint to the buttercream. And then I do add white gel color to get a white tone. You have to be careful though, because when you start adding things to your buttercream, it's inevitably going to change the flavor. A little bit doesn't really hurt, but if you add a ton, it will change the flavor. If you have any tips or tricks for tinting buttercream, specifically Swiss meringue, let us know. It's definitely like an art and a practice that you have to keep working at. Okay, so let's look at the difference now, having added a little bit of violet and white gel color compared to what we started with. This is the Swiss meringue that was sitting for a little bit of time and it looks super yellow. Now comparing it to what we just made into white. So that looks much better. And if you're making a wedding cake, most people don't want a yellow wedding cake. All right, so next tip is mixing for a while to get the right tone. I personally don't even like to work with buttercream that has been sitting like this. I don't like to just go and add my colors straight to this. I like the buttercream to be whipped for a while. It brings out a more whiter tone, which helps you get any color that you're going for. If you don't have that yellow undertone, you can get, you know, the right shade of blue or pink that you're going for, as opposed to starting with the yellow. I would just put your mixer on low for, I mean, upwards of 45 minutes and just let it go until it's really soft, creamy, and has a little bit more of a white color than what's just been sitting for a while. And my next trick and final tip is to use candy color. Candy color has an oil base and Swiss meringue buttercream is primarily butter. And so this actually works great to try to help you achieve those vibrant, bright colors that you're going for. A little bit goes a long way, and definitely I will say in my practice over the years, adding too much candy color 100% changes the flavor of your buttercream, so you really can't use a lot of it. It's meant to be just kind of an aid to what you're already doing. So for example, let's take this pink that we started with a few minutes ago. All we did here was add a little bit of gel color, and now I'm gonna add just a touch of candy color here. Just a touch, there's very little on there. Mix it up. I mean, you can see right before your eyes, it's already taking a really bright tone. And I'm gonna go out on a limb and say it looks better than the American one. So this is after adding just a drop of candy color. And let's compare it to the American one. So now which one's brighter and more vibrant? For sure the Swiss Meringue Buttercream one looks way better and really has a nice pink, vibrant tone. So a little bit of candy color goes a long way. You don't need very much, and you don't want to change the flavor of your buttercream. You really just want to get the color that you're going for. So those are my 7 tips and tricks. If you have any, please let us know. If you have any questions about colors, please feel free to ask. And don't forget to like and subscribe.